Sometimes the person who saves a family doesn't burst through the door with a grand plan. They simply show up quietly, casserole in hand, when hope is running on empty. When Callan Brody, a weathered single father clinging to routine, hired a widow to cook meals for his 7 unruly children, he expected nothing more than a break from burnt dinners. What he received was far more unexpected: the slow mending of hearts, one simple meal at a time. If stories like these speak to your soul, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes a quiet story can change everything. Now settle in, because this is where it begins. The kettle let out a sharp hiss, then fell silent, like a weary old friend giving up on being heard. Callan Brody didn't stir. He sat hunched at the edge of the kitchen table, arms braced against the worn cedar top, eyes fixed on the frost-laced window pane. Beyond it, a March wind swept across the Montana hayfield, moaning against the bones of the old farmhouse. Spring was supposed to be on its way, but it hadn't arrived. Not this year. Not for him. Behind him, 7 cereal bowls formed a crooked parade on the counter, some still full, others barely touched. The milk was already tepid. Boots. Now. He barked toward the hallway. Bus will be here in 10. A storm of feet and voices thundered down the staircase. Ely wailing about a missing hairbrush, the twins scuffling over the last banana, and Thatcher, his eldest, trailing quietly behind them, all like a shadow that had forgotten how to speak. Callan didn't look up, just took another sip of black coffee, more bitterness than warmth, and let the chaos pass through him, like fog, and no longer had the strength to clear. It had been 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days since laughter had left the house, since the morning he'd sat beside his wife Marley's hospital bed, gripping her hand as the warmth slipped away. He had whispered promises then. I'll keep them safe. I'll keep them smiling. But some promises die when the person you make them to stops breathing. That morning unfolded like all the rest. The bus came. The children spilled out the door, bundled in wool and worn shoes, and Callan was left alone with the silence. He turned to the sink, stared at crusted dishes from the night before, what had once been spaghetti, or something like it. A bitter trace of burnt tomato clung to the air. He scrubbed a pan for a moment, then gave up halfway, letting water run over it uselessly. That's when he noticed a note on the fridge. Callan, meeting moved to 2 p.m. Don't forget zoning paperwork. Paul, the barn expansion. More permits. Another obligation. Life kept moving. The problem was Callan didn't. Dinner that night was another disaster. Ely peeled string cheese slowly at the table. One of the twins had a stomachache. The boys attempted frozen pizza, but the crust emerged hard as plywood. Penny, the baby at 6 years old, looked up with soft, pleading eyes. Daddy, can we have real food tomorrow? The question hit harder than it should have. Callan's jaw clenched. He wanted to lash out, but nothing came. Just a hollow, muttered promise. I'll figure something out. Later, after the kids were tucked into beds they'd outgrown, Callan sat alone in the dim living room. The fire cast flickering shadows across a photo above the mantel. Marley barefoot in the grass, baby Penny on her hip, eyes dancing with joy. He rose with a weight in his chest, walked to his desk, and pulled out a yellow notepad. Cook needed. He hesitated. Part-time. Family of 8. Must handle chaos. Pay negotiable. Start ASAP. He scribbled his number at the bottom. No sentiment. No explanations. Just quiet surrender. By morning, the paper was pinned to the notice board outside the feed store in town. 2 calls came in before noon. One hung up at the word 7 kids. The other sounded bubbly, until she realized the job didn't come with free housing. After that, Callan stopped checking. By sunset, he was back to burning scrambled eggs. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected knock at the back screen door. Firm. Steady. Callan opened it, half expecting a solicitor or another well-meaning social worker. But it was a woman. She stood in a powder blue coat, scarf hand-knitted and slightly frayed. Her auburn hair was loosely braided over one shoulder. Her eyes, green-gray like wet river stones, met his without flinching. "I saw your note at the feed store," she said. "I'm here about the cooking job." Callan stared. She didn't look like someone who'd ever known the inside of grief. She looked like someone who came from a world still filled with color and hope. "No trial runs. No sweet talk," he said. "7 kids. No picky eaters. But they don't smile much. Neither do I." She simply smiled. "I'm not here to be liked. Just to cook." There was something in her voice, solid, unshaken, that made him pause. "Kitchen's through there," he said. "Do your worst." She walked in, shed her coat, and asked, "Where's the flour?" Within 30 minutes, the air was rich with butter and cinnamon. Callan stood by the hallway arch, arms folded, silently watching this stranger move like she belonged. The children came home to the smell. Eyes widened. Even Thatcher paused in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he'd entered the right house. "What is that?" Ely whispered. Callan didn't answer. He didn't know. But that night, for the first time in months, 7 children sat down to a hot, home-cooked meal. No arguments, no tears, just the quiet, miraculous sound of chewing. And for a few fleeting moments, the room softened. There was even a glance between Callan and the woman, a moment that lingered too long to be casual. Not attraction, not yet, but something else. Possibility. The next morning, she came back. Callan spotted her through the window, walking up the gravel path, canvas tote slung over one shoulder. She glanced back once, as if checking the world she'd left behind, then stepped forward. He opened the door before she knocked. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said. "You didn't say I couldn't," she replied. He let her in. No questions. She unpacked a weathered recipe book, its pages frayed like an old story retold too many times. Then, quietly, she unfolded a tea towel embroidered with a child's drawing, a small blue house, a stick family, an orange sun. She hung it gently on the oven handle, not for decoration, for grounding. He didn't ask about it. When the children returned from school, she greeted each by name, even Thatcher. They blinked at her, stunned by her memory, her presence. "There's chili on the stove," she whispered with mock seriousness. "But if you don't wash your hands, I'm hiding the good spoons." Not a threat, a ritual. They smiled. Even Thatcher smirked. Dinner was quiet, not with discomfort, but with peace. And when the meal ended, the kids cleared the table on their own. Callan found her standing by the window afterward, sipping coffee instead of eating. "You always stand while others eat?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Depends how much I need to remember where I am." He studied her. "You're not used to places like this." "I'm not used to staying." That night, the house creaked less. Or maybe Callan was simply hearing something new. As she packed her tote, he asked where she went at night. "A room above the bookstore on Birch," she replied. "No kitchen, but it's quiet." "You're cooking for 8 and going home to microwave soup?" She smiled. "Microwave's broken." He didn't offer her dinner. She didn't ask. But as she stepped out, he found himself saying, "The porch light stays on." Her eyes softened. So does mine. The next morning, she arrived early. Too early. He answered the door in a faded shirt, laces untied. "You said afternoons," he mumbled. "I made biscuits," she said, holding up the pan. "Couldn't sleep." He stepped aside again. A habit now. The kitchen filled with warmth, cheddar, herbs, a quiet hum of belonging. "Why cooking?" he asked unprompted. She didn't flinch. "Because I couldn't fix what I lost," she said softly. "But I can feed what's still hungry." Not just an answer. A wound laid bare. Callan said nothing, but something in him shifted. That morning, Penny found peach slices shaped into hearts. "Did you do this just for us?" she asked. Delaney knelt beside her. "Just for you." And that day, the house held laughter again, light, scattered, healing. Callan watched from the kitchen threshold, arms still folded, but something in his chest unfastened. The mornings were different now. The kettle didn't hiss alone. That Tuesday, she brought apple scones. "They're not sweet," she warned, unwrapping the foil. "But they're honest." He didn't know what she meant, but somehow they tasted like home, like hope, slowly returning. She no longer needed to ask where things were. Her rhythm, quiet, deliberate, had settled like snow on familiar ground. The coffee brewed without boiling over. The eggs didn't burn, and gone was the acidic fog of failure that used to haunt the air every time he tried to cook. It had vanished with her arrival, replaced by something softer, something close to hope. One by one, the children came down from their rooms, their socks mismatched, their hair tangled, but their shoulders less weighed down by the invisible burdens they used to carry. Penny skipped, actually skipped. "You're back," she squealed, arms flinging around Delaney's waist with the trust only a child could offer. "I said I would be." Delaney smiled, gently tucking a stray curl from Penny's forehead. Thatcher entered last, tall and quiet, more serious than a boy his age should be. His eyes held a world that didn't belong to a 13-year-old. He nodded toward Delaney, nothing more. She didn't press. Just set a scone on his plate and turned back to the stove. No coaxing, no questions, just presence. Breakfast moved with a quiet grace, a tide of calm. The children chewed through bites and half-jokes. Callan sat with them, coffee in hand, his mouth silent but his eyes wide open, watching his children, watching Delaney, watching a vision of life he hadn't allowed himself to dream of, not since the day everything changed. 2 weeks ago, he couldn't have imagined this, couldn't have pictured the stillness, the lightness, the comfort of someone simply being in the room. Later, when the bus rattled away down the gravel drive, and silence settled over the house like dust, Callan cleared his throat. "You always like mornings." Delaney glanced up from the sink, rinsing plates with practiced ease. "Not always, but starting something early means you've got time to fix it." He didn't reply, but the edge of his mouth twitched, a flicker of something not quite a smile. She noticed. She didn't mention it. That afternoon, Delaney returned, arms full groceries, fresh herbs, a dense loaf of something rustic and handmade. Callan leaned in the doorway of the mudroom, arms crossed like a man half-braced against change. "You didn't have to bring all that." She looked up from the bag. "I did. I pay for ingredients." He hated owing people, but something in the way she said it made it hard to argue. Instead, he asked, "You ever think about opening a bakery or something?" "I had one. Before." She didn't explain. He didn't pry. Dinner was roasted chicken, lemony green beans sautéed in garlic. The kids dug in with enthusiasm, except Thatcher. Callan noticed the way his son picked at his plate like the food wasn't there, staring not at it, but through it. Afterward, Delaney handed him a towel. "Help me dry." Thatcher hesitated, then stood. Callan held his breath but stayed silent. At the sink, they worked side by side, quiet as rain tapping on the roof. Delaney didn't fill the air with chatter. She passed him dishes, warm from the rinse, and he dried them one by one. Eventually, she said, You like to build things. Thatcher shrugged. Saw the wooden train upstairs. That yours? He nodded. I used to build pie racks with my dad, she said softly. We didn't talk much either, but our hands did. Thatcher was still, then whispered, Mom used to say that too. Delaney turned toward him, her gaze gentle. She sounds like someone I would have liked. He didn't reply, but when the last plate was stacked, he didn't rush off. He lingered, then murmured, She made biscuits with cinnamon. Not the regular kind, the warm kind. Delaney nodded slowly, like receiving a sacred recipe. I'll make them Thursday. And with that, a crack formed in the wall. Later that night, Callan sat in the armchair by the fire, shadows flickering across his face. Delaney stood in the doorway, her coat slung over her arm. Thatcher doesn't talk much, Callan said. I noticed. But he's always listening, always watching. He looked up at her. You're good at this. Her expression softened. At what? At making people want to stay at the table. She swallowed, gaze dropping. That wasn't always the case. Callan leaned forward. What happened? Delaney met his eyes. There was a storm behind them, one she had already weathered. My son was born early. 3 years ago. He didn't stay. The room stilled, not because of the Montana wind outside, but because of the truth that had just landed in the middle of it. Callan didn't speak, just nodded, slowly, deeply, with the weight of a man who understood what loss could do. Come back tomorrow, he said, quiet but certain. Delaney smiled faintly. I was going to. The next morning, Callan woke to the smell of cinnamon, and for the first time in too long, he didn't dread coming downstairs. The day unfolded as it always did. Frosted windows, cereal bowls, untied shoes. He signed a permission slip, tied Penny's laces with one hand, and drank lukewarm coffee with the other. Delaney wouldn't arrive until the afternoon, and the house felt emptier without her. Not noisier, just more hollow. You get used to peace, even when it isn't yours to keep. At 7:45, the bus pulled away. 7 faces behind foggy windows waved. Except one. He noticed too late. By mid-morning, Callan was elbow-deep in the barn's busted water heater, wind slapping through his coat. His phone buzzed. Need anything from store? Making something special tonight. Something about the message pulled at him. He stared at it for a moment before replying. Nope. Thanks. Then slid the phone back into his pocket. Fixing things with his hands was easier than fixing them with his heart. Delaney arrived at 3. Cheeks wind-kissed. Arms full. Something wrapped in blue cloth. Stopped at Rose's bakery, she said lightly. Thought we'd do something sweet tonight. She set to work. Apples peeled, butter warmed, potatoes sliced. Her rhythm, a language of care. He didn't notice the card tucked in the corner of the bakery box. Happy 10th Isley, in a child's handwriting. The kids burst through the door at 3:45, a whirlwind of backpacks and chatter. Delaney welcomed each one by name, handing out fruit slices and asking about spelling tests. But Ely sat quiet, cheeks pink, eyes dim. Delaney noticed first. Callan didn't, until she whispered. She didn't expect a party, but forgetting entirely, that's not like you. Callan blinked. What are you talking about? Delaney's brow knit with concern. Today's Ely's birthday. The words dropped like stones. He turned to his daughter. She sat tracing circles on her plate, trying hard not to look disappointed. Ely, he started. Why didn't you say something this morning? She shrugged. Didn't want to be a problem. That broke something inside him. Marley would have never allowed this, never let a child feel unseen. Ely had stayed quiet because she had already learned. Her needs no longer made the priority list. Dinner came early that night. Delaney laid the table with care, cloth napkins, a chipped pitcher, tiny wildflower centerpiece, brown sugar pork roast, creamy mashed potatoes, sautéed apples fragrant with clove and cinnamon. When Ely sat down, she looked confused. When Delaney set a cupcake with a single candle before her, she looked stunned. But when Callan sat across from her, slid a small hand-carved wooden horse across the table, and said, "I made it last week. Just for you." Her eyes filled. You remembered. He could have lied, pretended it was part of the plan. But there was no room for lies at the table anymore. "No," he said, "but I should have." And somehow, the truth didn't ruin the moment. It redeemed it. After dishes and too many slices of cake, Delaney stood by the door, coat in hand. Callan approached. "Thank you," he said, voice soft. She didn't turn around. She needed to feel like someone was thinking about her. "I should have been that someone." Delaney looked back. "You're trying. That counts more than you think." Callan studied her. This woman who'd walked into his kitchen with nothing but a tote bag and a quiet strength, and somehow rewrote the emotional temperature of the entire house. "I forgot my daughter's birthday." Delaney tilted her head. "And you carve her something by hand when no one was looking. That's not forgetting. That's being buried." Callan's voice caught. "Buried in what?" She held his gaze. Grief. Guilt. Fear. He couldn't answer, but he didn't deny it. The next morning, Ely packed her lunch without being asked. Peanut butter sandwich, sliced strawberries, and a folded note slipped in by her dad. "You are not a problem. You are a gift." "Dad." She didn't say a word, but when she hugged him goodbye, tighter than usual, he knew she'd read it. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first thing he'd done right in a very, very long time. By late afternoon, the sky was darkening. A heavy hush blanketed the land, the kind of silence that precedes thunder. Delaney looked up from the counter, her hands dusted with flour. "Storm's coming," she murmured. Callan didn't glance up from the door. He was fixing. Montana weather's never polite about it. She dried her hands. "I should head back early." "No," he said too quickly, then caught himself. "Wait till it passes. Roads turn to soup in minutes." She hesitated. "I don't want to impose." "You're feeding half my county," he said gruffly. "You've earned dinner." She smiled, then turned back to the dough. "Then I'll make extra." By 4 o'clock, thunder rolled low across the horizon. The scent of thyme and roasted chicken filled the house. Penny clung to Delaney's leg. "Will it be a big storm?" Delaney knelt beside her. "Big thunder, yes. But this house is strong. Promise." "You wouldn't be here if it wasn't," she added, wrapping her arms gently around the child. By 5:30, the storm was screaming. Branches clawed the windows. Rain slammed the roof. Water trickled from a seam near the back door. The power blinked, then blinked again, then went out completely. Penny ran to Delaney's apron-smudged waist. One of the twins whimpered. Ely gasped. Callan lit a lantern with practiced hands. "Upstairs," he said, calm and low. "Bring your blankets. All of you." The storm shifted eastward, but the heart of it was still over them. Delaney covered the food, packed what she could, and followed. Upstairs, the children were huddled in a quilted pile on a master bedroom floor, flashlights flickering like fireflies against the ceiling. Delaney stepped into the doorway, and no one said it aloud, but her presence felt like the safest thing in the house. Ken sat pressed against the far wall, arms slack over his knees, though the strain in his shoulders betrayed a man still holding too much. Even in the flickering shadows, the tension radiated off him, quiet, thick, and unspoken. Delaney entered the room softly, her steps quiet as breath, and passed him a folded towel for the window that wouldn't stop weeping with rain. He accepted it with a nod, murmuring, "Thanks," low enough it nearly dissolved into the storm's whisper. Then, without another word, she sank down beside the children on the floor. Penny, trembling, crawled straight into her lap, her little fingers clutching at Delaney's shirt like a lifeline. "I used to be scared of storms too," Delaney said gently, brushing strands of damp hair from Penny's forehead, voice slow and soothing. "What made you stop?" asked Ely, her voice tentative, curious. Delaney smiled faintly, her eyes soft with memory. "Someone I loved told me to listen instead of fear." "Listen to what?" "To the quiet after the loud." Across the room, Callan stood like a sentinel, watching her in the dim lamplight. Her profile was lit in slivers, steady, grounded, maternal in a way that didn't try too hard. It just was. The children didn't follow her because she demanded it. They followed because she offered a kind of refuge that asked nothing in return. And that, more than anything, terrified him. Because refuge, real refuge, was dangerous. It could undo a man before he even realized he'd opened the door. He turned and walked out without a word. Delaney found him 10 minutes later in the kitchen, his back to her, one hand braced hard against the sink. His gaze was locked on a half-covered pie on the counter, like it might swallow him whole. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't turn. "This house used to be loud during storms," he said after a beat. She stayed quiet. Marley would pull out board games. Blankets. We'd camp in the hallway. She'd turn candles into castles. The kids would laugh, even when the trees sounded like they were going to rip from the ground. He swallowed. "I haven't heard them laugh during a storm since." Delaney stepped into the kitchen, but said nothing, anchoring her presence like a warm current beneath his grief. When he finally turned, his eyes, usually guarded, distant, looked fractured. A man breaking quietly. "I feel like I'm failing all of them." She didn't look away. "You're not." "I forgot Ely's birthday." "You remembered it the next day." "That's not the same." "No," she said, her voice like soft cloth against broken glass. "But neither is grief. It doesn't move in straight lines." The windows shook again, louder this time, as if the wind was reminding them that storms don't always pass gently. Callan looked up at her, something raw surfacing behind his eyes. "You staying?" Delaney lifted her chin slightly. "If you're asking me like that, then yes." He nodded. Then, after a long pause that held more meaning than most conversations, "Stay the night." He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his own voice. "The couch is yours." Delaney studied him, slow and thoughtful. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take care of breakfast." That night, after the storm had dulled to a whisper and the kids had finally fallen asleep, some tucked in beside each other like driftwood after high tide, Delaney stood alone in the kitchen, folding napkins just to give her hand something to do. She looked toward the couch, where a pillow and blanket waited. For the first time in years, the idea of staying didn't feel like trespassing. It felt like beginning. Morning arrived wearing a heavy stillness. Mist hung over the fields like a held breath, the land itself unsure whether to move or mourn. Inside the Brody farmhouse, the children lay tangled in quilts on the living room floor, limbs overlapping, hair tousled, peaceful in a way that only comes after storms. A single lamp glowed warmly near the couch where Delaney lay, already awake. She hadn't really slept. The thunder had passed, but something else lingered. Not fear. Something quieter. Something wondering if she had stayed too long, or not long enough. In the kitchen, Callan was already making coffee. He didn't turn as she entered. "You snore," he said dryly, a smirk laced beneath the words. Delaney raised an eyebrow. I do not. Maybe it was one of the twins. She chuckled under her breath, pouring herself a cup, leaning against the counter. They stood there, not speaking, listening to the birds outside begin their slow morning hymn. You stayed, he said after a while, still not looking at her. You asked. He nodded, then took a long sip, like it cost him something to admit he was grateful. By the time the kids stirred, Delaney was halfway through breakfast. They swarmed the table with chaotic joy, rumpled, half-dressed, full of questions. Except for Thatcher. He came in last, as he always did. Hair still wet from a rushed rinse. Shirt tucked too tightly into his jeans, as if trying too hard not to be noticed. He muttered a quiet morning, and sat down, eyes fixed on toast he never touched. Delaney passed him the butter in silence. He took it without meeting her gaze. That evening, a knock sounded at the door. Paul Kirchner stood on the porch, tracking in half of Montana on his boots. Fence wire in one hand, bluntness in the other. Saw your cook at the market, he announced as he stomped in. She yours. Callan's jaw tightened. She works here. Paul grinned, oblivious. Well, you better hold on to her. Smells like real food in this place again. Marley'd be impressed. The room tensed. Delaney paused mid-motion, a bowl of greens in her hands. She didn't say a word, but the kids fell silent, even the twins. Callan didn't look at Paul. We're just grateful to eat together again. But the ghost had already entered. Dinner was quiet, stiff. Delaney served beef stew with precise movements and unreadable eyes. Callan sat at the head of the table, shoulders wound tight. Across from him, Thatcher chewed mechanically, watching everything. And then, finally, he spoke. Was Mom better at this? The question hit like a door slamming. Callan's head snapped up. What? At cooking. Was she better? Callan set down his spoon. She cooked different things. That's not what I asked. Delaney froze with a dish in her hand, afraid to breathe. Callan's voice dropped low. Why are you asking? Because everyone's acting like nothing changed, Thatcher said. Like it's normal now to laugh, to eat, to pretend she's not gone. Ely looked down. Penny gripped her spoon tighter. Callan's hand whitened around his glass. No one's pretending. Thatcher stood. She's not our mom. Stop acting like she is. Delaney placed the dish down carefully, hands trembling just enough to be human. She didn't speak, didn't run. She just nodded once and began quietly clearing plates. Callan sat there, fire in his eyes, anger, guilt, maybe both. She never tried to be, he finally said, voice low. You just assumed she wanted to. But Thatcher was already gone, after the kids had been settled, some in tears, some just stunned quiet. Delaney stood at the sink, washing dishes no one had dirted. Callan appeared beside her, dish towel in hand. I'm sorry, he said softly. It's not your fault. He's grieving. So am I, she murmured, barely above the sound of running water. He turned toward her. I'm not trying to take anyone's place, she said. I know what it's like to lose someone who can't be replaced. He set down the towel. Who is he? Delaney's hands paused in the water. My son, Cole. He lived 31 hours. The kitchen seemed to close in. I held him, she whispered, until he didn't breathe anymore. Callan didn't say anything, just reached for the dish in her hand, dried it slowly, wordlessly. Later that night, she placed a plate outside Thatcher's bedroom door. A simple roll, a small slice of apple pie. No note. In the morning, the plate was gone, washed, and sitting neatly in the sink. And that, in its own quiet way, was an answer. Saturday came with the smell of thaw and promise. Wet earth, pine, Delaney stood at the counter alone, sleeves rolled up, kneading warm dough like it was a prayer. A window cracked open, letting in spring. On the table, a notebook sat open, half a recipe in her writing, the rest in childlike scrawl. She traced it lightly with her fingers before folding it closed. It wasn't her handwriting. It was Thatcher's. Last night, after the storm, she'd gone to bed expecting silence. A deep one that would settle for good. But that morning, Thatcher had come into the kitchen early, pajama pants dragging, holding an old wooden box. "My mom taught me how to bake this," he said, not quite looking at her. "But I forgot the steps." She didn't say anything, just moved aside and made space. Now he sat at the table, watching the dough rise, foot tapping nervously. "Yeast is weird," he muttered. Delaney smiled. "It is, but you feed it and it grows. That's kind of creepy. So is grief. Sometimes it swells up when you're not looking." He didn't reply, but he didn't leave. Mid-morning, the house smelled of warm bread. The other kids trickled in, drawn to the scent and to the surprise of seeing Thatcher still at the table. "You're baking," Ely whispered. "Just helping." He shrugged. Penny peeked over the counter from Delaney's lap. "Are there raisins?" "No raisins," Delaney said. "But there's honey." "Good," Penny declared. "Raisins are sneaky." And for the first time in days, laughter echoed. Even Thatcher smiled. Just a smirk, but it stayed. Delaney handed him a knife. "Score the top. Make a mark. It helps the crust breathe." He hesitated, then dragged a single line across the dough. Simple, clean. "Mom used to call it the breath," he said. "Said bread has to breathe or it'll break." She was right. They slid the pan into the oven together. Their hands brushed. While it baked, he asked softly, "Why'd you come here?" She turned off the sink, wiped her hands. "Because I was tired of cooking for no one." He nodded slowly. "I miss her. I don't want to forget her." "Then don't," Delaney said. "You can miss her and still let someone care about you." "What if that's not fair?" She opened the oven just a crack. The kitchen filled with golden warmth. She left something good. This family. You. That's the part you carry forward. That's what's fair. He didn't speak, but when the bread came out, he helped her lift it, hand steady. Delaney handed him a butter knife. "Want the first slice?" He paused, then cut it in two. "You first." He handed her a piece of the bread, still warm, rough at the edges, imperfect in all the right ways. Delaney bit into it, and a soft, surprised hum escaped her lips. Callan's brow lifted. "What? It's good," she said, her voice thick with quiet wonder. "You sound surprised." She looked at him, not in criticism, but with the kind of awe reserved for rare, hard-won things. "I was just thinking how proud your mom would be." And for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, too fleeting, too fragile to name. But he stood a little taller as he took his own bite, like her words had filled in a hollow space he didn't know was empty. That evening, Callan sat at the dinner table watching his children eat like they hadn't in months. Clean plates, full mouths, the kind of soft chatter that warmed the walls. Across from him, Delaney sat dusted in flour, her hair loose around her shoulders, her laughter easy. And then, without being asked, Thatcher passed her the butter. It was a small gesture, but for Callan Brody, it was monumental. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but inside him. Later, as the sky blushed with lavender and dusk settled over the land, Callan joined Delaney on the porch steps. The silence between them was easy, not strained. "Thatcher doesn't let people in easily," he said. "I wasn't trying to get in," she replied, gaze set on the horizon. "That's probably why it worked." A long pause lingered between them before he spoke again, softer this time. "I've made a lot of mistakes. Still am." Delaney smiled faintly. The bread didn't rise right the first time either. He chuckled, just a little. "Yeah, but it still fed someone." The phone call came quietly, as most life-altering things do. It was a Tuesday, tucked between leftover meatloaf and a faint whisper of spring. Delaney had just pulled a tray of blueberry muffins from the oven when her phone buzzed against the counter. She glanced at it casually, then froze. Unknown number. Sheridan, Wyoming. Her heart dropped like a stone. She stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door sigh shut behind her. "Hello," she answered. A woman's voice, calm, but not casual. "Ms. Ryan, this is Susan Mallister from Oak Pines Assisted Living. We've been trying to reach you." Delaney's breath caught. "Is it my grandmother?" "Yes. She's had a mild stroke this morning. She's stable, but you may want to come soon." Delaney leaned against the porch post, the dish towel clenched in her hand. "How soon?" A pause. "Tonight, if possible." She didn't tell Callan right away. Instead, she finished dinner the way she always did, attentively, lovingly, with quiet hands that knew how to soothe just by being present. The kids laughed. Thatcher even cracked a joke. Penny recited a poem about dragons and chickens. Ely helped with dessert. Delaney smiled. She even laughed. But she didn't stay. She hung up her apron with care, grabbed her tote bag, and wiped down the counter one last time. Callan found her in the mudroom, his brow creased. "Heading out early." She didn't meet his eyes. "Something's come up." "What is it?" She paused. "I need to go to Wyoming. Family." His expression shifted. Not anger. Not confusion. Something quieter. "Is it serious?" Delaney nodded. "My grandmother. She raised me." He stepped back slightly, giving her space to pass. "When will you be back?" "I don't know." His jaw tightened, but he only nodded. She walked past him, but paused at the door. "I didn't plan on staying this long," she said softly. "I didn't plan on needing you," he replied. And just like that, the silence between them took on a new shape, one that ached. That night, the Brody house felt unfamiliar, too still, too off-kilter. "Is Miss Delaney sick?" Penny asked. "No," Ken said. "She had to visit someone." "Will she be back?" Ely whispered. Callan said nothing, because he didn't know. The next morning was a mess. The eggs burned. The toast caught fire. One of the twins poured orange juice into a bowl of dry cereal. No one laughed. Callan tried, but the rhythm was broken. The gravity that had once held them steady had shifted. He found a note on the fridge, Delaney's handwriting, neat and thoughtful. "Meals for the next 3 days, in case I don't make it back right away. D." It read like a goodbye. Delaney arrived in Sheridan beneath a low, gray sky. The light inside the care home was too bright, too clinical, like it washed the color out of everyone. Her grandmother, once fierce and unshakable, was small now, fragile. They spoke in murmurs, stories remembered between spoonfuls of soup and the rhythm of beeping monitors. Delaney stayed 2 nights. The third, she sat at the window, watching the wind rattle the trees, and realized something painfully simple. This place used to be home, but it wasn't anymore, because back in Montana there were 7 children she hadn't given birth to, and a man who hardly spoke his heart, and yet it was them she missed. On the 4th morning, she opened the pantry to make breakfast and wept because it was empty, because there were no fingerprints on the fridge door, no one to fight over corner muffins, no laughter to echo off the walls. That night, she whispered into the silence, "I think I left something behind." And for the first time, she realized it wasn't something. It was someone. At the Brody house, Illy found a jar Delaney had tucked away on the top shelf, peach jam, with a note on it. For when toast needs magic. She clutched it like it was treasure. Penny asked to sleep with one of Delaney's oven mitts. Thatcher stopped saying grace out loud. And Callan stood in the kitchen doorway after dinner, staring at the space she used to stand. "Come home," he said softly, to no one at all. She returned on a Sunday, boots dusty, eyes tired, heart still in Montana, even before she crossed the threshold. She didn't knock. Callan opened the door before her hand reached the knob. They didn't speak. She stepped into the kitchen, which hadn't changed. But she had. She set down her bag, took a breath. "If I'm going to keep walking away," she said, "you better tell me now." Callan didn't move, didn't blink. "You can't," he said finally. "We're already waiting." It was the first Sunday in April when Delaney stayed not to serve, not to clean, but to sit. The chair had always been there, between Thatcher and Ely. But tonight Callan pulled it out. He said nothing, just rested his hand on its back. Waiting. Delaney paused, spoon still in hand. "Sit, Miss Delaney." Penny chirped. "This one's yours." Callan's eyes met hers across the table. "You've earned it," he said. So she sat. The meal was chicken and rice. Warm biscuits. The kind of dinner meant for healing. Ken had tried to make it while she was gone. It hadn't turned out, but this time she made it. The kids noticed the difference. They didn't say it out loud, but they reached for seconds, passed the butter reverently. Across the table, Thatcher broke his biscuit in two and slid half toward Delaney. She accepted it without a word, because that's how bridges are built here. One quiet kindness at a time. After dinner, Callan reached under the table and pulled out something wrapped in a kitchen towel. It was long, narrow, crafted by hand. He unwrapped it slowly. A wooden plaque, stained chestnut, etched in soft script. "This table feeds 8. In the corner, a small handprint in flour, sealed forever under varnish. "Pennies. I started it when you were gone," Ken said, eyes lowered. "Finished it yesterday." Delaney touched it, warm from his hands, imperfect and beautiful. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't," Callan replied. "Just stay." That night, after the children had gone to bed, the dishes washed without anyone being asked, Callan poured 2 cups of tea, one sweet, one plain. He joined Delaney on the back porch. The air smelled of new grass, wet earth, and something like hope. Delaney wrapped her fingers around the mug. "I didn't think I'd come back." "You did. I wasn't sure you'd let me." Callan leaned back in his chair. "I wasn't sure I'd know how." Silence stretched between them. Soft, comfortable. "You carved something permanent," she said, "for someone who hasn't promised to stay." "I'm not asking for a promise," he said. "Just asking you to keep coming back." Delaney looked into her tea, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the first thing anyone's ever asked me that didn't come with strings." "No strings," Callan said. "Just biscuits and chairs and little girls who think you hung the moon." Delaney laughed. Not politely, not gently, but the kind of laugh that shakes the ribs free. "They think you did too. I haven't done anything right in a long time. You've done something right every day since I met you. You just forgot to give yourself credit." Inside, the plaque had already been mounted. Above it, a new coat hook, taller than the rest. Sturdier. Delaney hadn't seen it yet, but she would. The next morning, the sun stretched long golden arms across the floorboards. Her apron, the soft gray one with the stitched bird, hung from that 8th hook. She reached for it slowly, like it was sacred, and began the day. It wasn't a grand gesture that changed everything. It was the way Callan started coming in 5 minutes earlier from a barn, wiping his hands, asking, "Need anything chopped?" It was the way Delaney stopped measuring flour so tightly when Penny insisted that a big scoop of love made pancakes fluffier. It was a mug set beside another mug. No questions. No explanations. Just being seen. On Tuesday, Delaney walked into the kitchen to find Callan turning bacon. "Now you're just showing off," she teased. "I figure if I burned it, you'd jump in." He handed her a cup. "Milk. 1 sugar." She blinked. "You remembered. You take care of 7 kids, a moody ex-firefighter, and a house full of squeaky doors. Remembering your coffee order seemed like the least I could do." She sipped, smiled. "I could get used to this." By midweek, the rhythm between them was effortless, fluid. She stirred soup. He set the table. She reached for Penny's hair and bumped into Callan's arm as he leaned down. They froze for a heartbeat, then smiled. "I think we've finally stopped orbiting," he murmured. "I'm not scared of falling anymore," she replied. That evening, they made cinnamon rolls, real ones, the kind made by hand and scattered with sugar like stardust. Thatcher volunteered to make the frosting. He handed Delaney the spoon to taste. And across the kitchen, Callan watched her smile. And that's when she knew. This was home again. They didn't talk about Marley much anymore. Not because she was forgotten, but because she was folded into the very dough of their days, respected, remembered, sweetened. One night, Illy brought out an old photo album. "We want to show Miss Delaney," she said, and no one needed to ask why. Delaney held the photograph between her fingers as though it were something sacred, something fragile and irreplaceable. Her eyes scanned its edges, worn with time, soft with memory. "He thought you should see this," she said, lifting it with reverence. Callan, who'd just finished drying the dishes, stilled at the sight of it. The line of his back tightened subtly. Delaney's hands were still damp from the sink, the towel forgotten in her lap. She looked up at him gently. "Only if you're ready," she added, her voice low and kind. It was Thatcher who had said she should know where they came from. So after dinner, they gathered on the living room floor, the children nestled in laps or curled around pillows. The photographs were faded, edges curled like old leaves, but the faces were vivid. Marley on a tire swing, laughter frozen in midair. Halloween costumes stitched with love. Callan younger, holding baby Penny with arms both strong and uncertain. Delaney listened. She asked questions. She laughed when the kids laughed, and leaned in close when they spoke of their mother's quirks and the stories she used to tell. And then, on the very last page, someone had slipped in a new photo. All 8 of them, around the dining table. Delaney seated at the center. A place claimed not with ceremony, but with presence, with love, with the kind of permanence that needs no announcement. Later that week, Callan found her in the pantry, on a quiet afternoon with light slanting through the back window. She was alphabetizing the spices, humming faintly to herself. No one had touched that shelf in years. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded with quiet amusement. "You know cumin doesn't care where it lives, right?" She didn't look up. "Maybe. But I do." He tilted his head. "You like order?" "I like love disguised as order," she said simply, turning a label so it faced forward. He stepped inside the room. The air between them was close, but easy. "Have you ever thought about what it would look like to stay?" She turned to him slowly, her expression open, clear. "Are you asking me to?" He hesitated, not out of fear, but because some things carry more weight when left unspoken a moment longer. "Not out loud," he said. Delaney smiled, a smile soft and sure. "Well, when you do, I'll pretend to be surprised." That Saturday, the family took a picnic out near the pasture. The sun was warm but not cruel, coaxing life from the thawing earth. They spread a worn quilt under a sycamore that had stood longer than memory. Delaney passed out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Penny handed around juice boxes, proud and giggling. The twins ran wild, chasing butterflies and rules alike. Thatcher sat beneath a tree, quietly sketching, capturing something he didn't need to explain. Callan lowered himself beside Delaney, close enough that their elbows nearly brushed. He looked out over the field and the chaos, and let out a long breath. It's a lot of noise. Delaney's eyes swept across the scene, the crumbs in the grass, the laughter, the messy abundance of it all. It's a lot of life, she said. He exhaled again, longer this time. Sometimes I still feel like I'm holding it all together with duct tape and a prayer. She turned to him, her gaze steady. You're not just holding it together, Callan. You rebuilt it, from pieces most people would have left broken, and you made something stronger. He swallowed. The truth of it lodged deep in his throat. That scares me. She reached out finally, after all the half-spaces, and let her hand rest gently on his. It scares me too. But this, she gestured toward the wild joy unfolding around them. This is worth being brave for. That evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Callan discovered a note tucked beneath the bread box. The handwriting was unmistakably Penny's, big loops and crooked lines. When people love each other, they make each other toast. He read it once, then handed it to Delaney without a word. She laughed, a sound caught somewhere between surprise and awe, then folded the note neatly and slipped it into the family recipe book, tucking it right between cinnamon rolls and chicken and rice, exactly where it belonged. Easter morning broke with soft golden light and a chorus of early birds, the kind of morning that makes the world feel new again. Callan Brody stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping pancakes that were too lopsided to be perfect and didn't need to be. Delaney had still been asleep when he rose, rarity, and he had kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sleep, just this once." She'd murmured something drowsy in protest, but hadn't moved. The kiss was new. The comfort wasn't. Lately, the kids had been whispering more than usual, hushed voices behind bedroom doors, odd requests for glitter and string and glue sticks. Something was in the works. He could feel it. What he didn't expect was the knock on the front door at exactly 9 a.m. He opened it to find Pastor Riley and his wife Ruth, standing on the porch with foil-covered pans and a bouquet of cheerful daisies. "We heard your cook's been working miracles," Ruth beamed. Callan chuckled. "She's not a cook," he said. "She's Delaney." "Well," Pastor Riley said, stepping inside with a warm grin, "I hope she's ready to be celebrated." The house filled fast. Neighbors, friends, children in pastel clothes who couldn't sit still. The Brody home, once so hollow, so quiet it echoed, now pulsed with laughter, color, and life. Delaney stepped into the doorway, blinking sleep from her eyes, just as Ruth placed a crown of wildflowers on Penny's head. "What is all this?" she asked, still half dreaming. Ely tugged her hand. "We made a surprise." Delaney followed her into the dining room. The table had been transformed. Handmade placemats, each one drawn by a child. Hers was at the head of the table, a place no one else could claim. Above it hung a sign in bold, imperfect crayon. "Our family is full, thanks to you." Delaney stopped in her tracks, one hand flying to her mouth. Callan stepped behind her, close enough to feel her heartbeat. His voice was low, meant only for her. "They wanted to show you how they feel." She turned to face him, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. "And you," she asked, "how do you feel?" There was no hesitation. "I feel like I'd rather grow old beside you than spend one more day pretending this isn't real." Then, from his pocket, he pulled a ring. Not flashy, not perfect, A simple silver band, hammered by hand. Inside, the smallest engraving, one meal at a time. He didn't kneel. He just held it out. "I'm not asking you to be anyone you're not," he said. "I'm not asking you to fix what can't be fixed. I'm just asking you to keep showing up, to keep cooking beside me, sitting at the table, coming back." Delaney didn't cry. Not yet. She slipped a ring on her finger, her voice a whisper wrapped in joy. "I never left." The celebration was glorious in its imperfection. Potluck dishes crowded the counters. Plates didn't match. Lemonade spilled, and no one apologized. Penny made a toast with chocolate milk. Thatcher told a joke that actually landed. The twins launched a whipped cream war and mopped up the mess themselves. And through it all, Callan and Delaney moved as if they'd always been this, side by side, heart to heart. No speeches were made, no declarations needed, because the table spoke for all of them. That night, when the guests had gone and the stars had stitched themselves back into the night sky, Delaney stepped out onto the porch, her arms folded gently across her chest. The wind moved softly through the trees. Callan joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "Tomorrow's Monday," she said. "It is. Back to school. Crumbs under the sink." He smiled. Back to real life. She looked at him, the porch light glinting in her eyes. "You still want this?" He didn't waver. "All of it," he said. "Even the raisins." Delaney laughed, truly laughed, deep and unguarded, the sound of someone who'd been holding their breath for far too long. "You're sure?" He reached out, touching her hand gently. "I want ordinary with you." Inside, the kitchen glowed. 7 backpacks hung from their usual hooks. And now, beside them, an 8th apron, hers, waited patiently. At the heart of the table, tucked between the salt and the crumbs and the fingerprints of a life well loved, sat a small folded note in Penny's handwriting. "We didn't know we needed a mom again, but now we do. Please stay." Delaney picked it up, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "I already have." And sometimes the most extraordinary miracles don't arrive with thunder or fanfare. Sometimes they happen right around a dinner table. Thank you for joining us for this story. A story about grief and grace, about healing through love, about how the simple act of sharing a meal can rebuild a home and a heart. If this touched you, leave us a note and come back next time. There are more stories to tell. From our family to yours, thank you.